Okay, this video we're going to look through section 3.5 in your textbook. That's on page 172. And we're going to talk about solving quadratic equations, solving quadratic functions. And basically what that means is that we have to find x. So when we graph these, we're looking for our x-intercepts. And then sometimes we have to interpret, but the main goal is going to be to find our x-intercepts. We've got different options. One option would be to factor. Another option, because not everything factors, is that we have to use our quadratic formula. So if you don't remember, it's been a while probably. Our quadratic formula says that we have ax squared plus bx plus c. When we have our equation in standard form, x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So it's a bit of a pain. Sum in your values, watch your order of operations, watch your signs, and you'll be fine. Take your time. Take your time when you do this one, okay? And then you interpret your question. Okay, so example 1 talks about a break-even point. We often see those words. We're given a profit equation of negative 0.5x squared plus 8x minus 24. We know our profit is our profit in thousands of dollars, and they say that so we don't have a whole bunch of zeros in here. It gives us easier numbers to work with. And we're told that x is how many are sold. So we can solve this two ways. Break-even points mean find our x-intercepts. We can factor it, or we can use the quadratic formula. If we were to factor it, well, I'd maybe look to see if I can. So let's common factor out our 0.5. So let's try it. Equals negative 0.5 bracket. So that leaves us with x squared. We took out a negative, so it changes our signs. If we take out half, then we've essentially doubled our number inside. So we got 16x. And change our sign again. So we've got plus 24 times 2 is 48. Okay, so don't be worried about a decimal. It really just means I've taken out a half. So these ones just get doubled. All right. Do I have two numbers that multiply to equal the last, which is 48, and two numbers that add to equal the middle, which is negative 16? Well, let's think it through. 48. Let's see. That is 148, 2, 24, 3. So that gives me 18. 3 times 9. Are any of these looking good? No? Okay, how about 4 and 12? Oh, that works. If I have a negative 4 and a negative 12, that'll add to negative 16. And since they are both negative, we've multiplied to 48. All right, we're almost done. So that means that P of x is equal to negative 0.5 bracket x minus 4 bracket, new bracket, x minus 12. And there's our break-even points. Just read it out of your equation. So when my whole set of bracket equals 0, so x equals 4, and this set of brackets equals 0, therefore x equals 12. So there's my two break-even points. I have to sell at least 4 or 12. So let's interpret this one a little wee bit. Let's make sure, common sense. Did I get the right answer? Well, let's think here. I've got, there's my x, there's my y. If I have a dot at 4, I have a dot at 12, and back it up here, I've got a negative, which means my function comes down. Yeah, sure, that makes sense. Okay, well, what if we hadn't factored it? Can we still solve it using our quadratic formula? Definitely, that always works. First thing we need to do is look at our function and we're going to pick out our coefficients. So whatever's attached to the x squared, that's our a. So a is negative 0.5. Whatever's attached to the x is our b. So b equals 8. And the number with no x is our c. So c is negative 24. So then we stick everything in our formula and see what comes out. So we know x is negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. So let's see, negative b is 8 plus or minus square root b squared is 8 squared minus 4 times a, which is negative 0.5. And c is negative 24. Watch all those negative signs, people. All divided by 2 times a, which is our negative 0.5. Okay, calculator time. Let's see, negative 8 plus or minus square root. Let's simplify this up. 8 squared is 64. We've got a negative times a negative, that makes a positive, times another negative means we've got a minus. 4 times 0.5 is 2. 2 times 24 is 48. All divided by negative. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Well, that's an easy number to work with. I like that. So now, let's see. We've got negative 8 plus or minus square root 64 minus 48, 16. Right? Yep. Divided by negative 1. And we're so very close. So the square root of 16 is a nice easy one. So my two answers are going to be x is negative 8 plus 4 over negative 1. So what does that give me? 4 minus 8 is negative 4. Divided by negative 1 gives me a positive 4. And my other answer is negative 8 minus 4 divided by negative 1 gives me negative 12 divided by negative 1, which is positive 12. So there's my two zeros. X equals 4 and x equals 12, just like when I factored. Well done. Okay, let's take a look at example 2. So this is a height question. Height questions we deal with a lot because gravity is a quadratic. So they almost always start with negative 5. It might say negative 4.9. Plus 30t plus 10. So these numbers will change depending on the question. We're told that our height is in meters. We're told our time is in seconds. Then the first part of the question is asking for our domain and range. So before we even answer those, let's maybe give ourselves a little think as to what our graph is even going to look like. So let's see. We've got height is over here on my y-axis. We've got time is down here on my x-axis. This plus 10 out here, that's my y-intercept. That's my initial height. So I can put that dot on my graph. And let's, I don't know, call it here. I don't have to be to scale. I just have to have an idea of what we're talking about here. Okay. We know it's a negative, which means it's going to curve down. So let's just guess, since it's a quadratic, we're going to go up. We're going to hit some vertex. And then we're going to come down. And then we're going to hit the ground. So here's where we hit the ground. Well, that's our x-intercept. X-intercept. So that's at h of t equals 0. Okay. We are going to reach a max height. So that's going to happen at our vertex. And that's going to make a difference with our range. So let's remember range is all of our y values. So that's going to be defined by our max height. Okay. And our domain, remember, is all of our x values. So that's going to be defined by our x-intercept. Okay. So our domain is going to be somewhere between x is less than t less than or equal to whenever it hits the ground. And our height is going to be anywhere, or our range, I mean, is going to be anywhere between 0, less than or equal to our height, less than or equal to whatever my max is. Okay, so we got to figure out our vertex, and we got to figure out our x-intercept. Okay, let's worry about maybe finding our vertex. So to do that, remember I'm looking for my vertex. So let's put it into vertex form. And the easiest way to do that is probably complete the square. So to find vertex, let's complete the square. Okay, because that puts it directly in a vertex form. So let's see, we are dealing with h at t equals negative 5t squared plus 30t plus 10. So let's see here. I'm going to just set my equals over here to give me enough space. So we've got negative 5. I'm going to common factor that out here. T squared minus 5 times 6 gives me negative 6t. Great big gap. End bracket plus 10 at the end. Okay. Why do I leave my big gap? Because this is where we're going to do our complete the square trick. So 6 divided by 2 gives me 3. Negative 3. Because we're doing negative 6. So we're going to add negative 3 squared. And we're going to subtract negative 3 squared. And that's our trick with completing the square. And we do that because then these 3 terms here all become x minus 3 all squared. You see that? Yeah. And then we put in everything else around it. So what do we got? We've got negative 5 out front. Great big bracket. We completed the square to end up with x minus 3 bracket squared. So that takes these guys. We still have this minus 9 inside these brackets. And then we had that plus 10 kind of tagging along at the end. So to finish, we have to bring this minus 9 out of the brackets. When we do, we can't forget that we have to multiply it by that negative 5 in order to take this out of the brackets. So we've got equals negative 5 bracket x minus 3 squared. 5 times 9, so we get plus 45 plus 10. Final answer, negative 5 bracket x minus 3 all squared plus 55. So now I have my vertex. That's those lovely numbers. So my vertex is at 3 bracket 55. Excellent. Now that we have our vertex, we can definitely say what our range is now that we have our maximum height. Range, we said was, what do we got? Height. So our height will be any real number such that 0 is less than or equal to, wait, this isn't right. Let's try that again. I didn't like how it was looking. Our range is the set of values such that h at t, right, because we got to stick with our function notation here, is any real number such that 0, because that's our minimum, is less than or equal to h at t less than or equal to our maximum, which we just found. Okay, so it goes between ground and my max height. Okay, so we know our function. We've got 2 different versions of it. We have it in standard form, and in our last part, we figured out what it looked like in vertex form. I'm actually going to take the vertex form, and I'm going to show you another little trick here. So we know height at t, we just figured it was -5 bracket x minus 3 squared plus 55. That's what we ended up with as our vertex form. Well, when I want to figure out my domain, and I need to figure out when it lands on the ground, we got to find out, oh, I've messed up here. That's supposed to be a t. We have to figure out what time it is when the height is 0. So we need to set all of that equal to 0. T minus 3 squared plus 55. And we now have the skills and the tools to rearrange this and solve for t. Okay, let's try that. So we minus 55 from both sides. So we end up with -55 equals -5 bracket t minus 3 all squared. Next step would be to move our -5. So let's divide both sides by -5. And what's that equal? 11. So we've got 11 equals bracket t minus 3 all squared. And we know when we go to take the square root of that, we have to make sure that we've got the plus or minus version of it. Okay, because we need 2. There are 2 involved in there. So we know we've got plus or minus square root of 11 equals t minus 3, because the square root takes out the square. Move the 3 to the other side, so instead of minusing, we're going to do plus 3 to both sides. And look at that! New skill, new trick. Therefore, time equals 3 plus or minus root 11. So I get 2 answers, and that's fine. My negative would be like the back in time over here, and the positive is going to be when it lands on the ground there. So we've got a time equals -0.32 if I minus my root. And my other answer would give me 6.32. Don't want the negative because that's back here. We want the positive, that's here. So now we know our domain. So our domain, well, we have to start at 0. Okay. So our domain will be t is any real number such that 0 is less than or equal to t is less than or equal to 6.32. Well done. All right, so that was part A. Now part B wants to know when the height is going to equal 30 meters. So that means I need to figure out 30 meters is in there somewhere. So, oh, look at that. We're going to have 2 answers probably. All right, let's see. We know h at t is -5t squared plus 30t plus 10. And we want to solve this for when height is 30. So I'm going to put my 30 there. -5t squared plus 30t plus 10. Well, in order to do some solving, we're going to have to move this 30 to the other side. So instead of the plus, we're going to minus 30 from both sides. So that way we've got 0 on one side and everything else on the other side. So we've got 0 equals -5t squared plus 30t minus 20. So we got to solve for that answer. We can do this in all our different methods. We can do factoring if factoring works. We can use quadratic formula if factoring doesn't work, or if we don't automatically see it. I don't think we've done a quadratic formula yet, so let's do it. All right. First things first, coefficients. A is -5, B is 30, C is -20. All right. X equals -b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Sub it in. -30 plus or minus square root 30 squared minus 4 times a, which is -5, times C, which is negative 20. Okay. All over 2 times A, which is negative 5. Order of operations, people. Let's simplify some things here. So we've got negative 30 plus or minus square root of 30 squared. Well, 3 squared is 9. Give it a couple of zeros. And then I've got a negative times a negative, which gives me a positive, times another negative is a negative. 4 times 5 is 20, times 20 gives me 400. All divided by 2 times negative 5 is negative 10. Whew, that's a lot. These questions are not short. Let's do this. All right. Negative 30 plus or minus square root of 9 minus 4 gives me 5, so 500. All divided by negative 10. This does not work out easily or evenly, so I think it's calculator time. So let's see. We now know that our time is going to be equal to negative 30 plus root 500, all divided by negative 10. And time is equal to negative 30 minus root 500, all divided by negative 10. When you throw it into your calculators, be very cautious about your signs. And I highly recommend you either hit enter or equals after your numerator, or put your entire numerator into brackets. Otherwise, you will not get the right answer because your calculator will not type it in right. Final answer, you should get a time of 0.764. And for my other scenario, I have a time of 5.236. So I have 2 times when my height is going to be 30. Therefore, the ball is, or balloon or whatever, at 30 meters at times 0.764 seconds and 5.236 seconds. Done. All right, so I was going to do their example 3, but I didn't really like it. And so instead, I made up one. Let's see how it goes. That matches more one of your homework questions anyways. So let's see. We've got a rectangle that has an area of 500 meters. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Draw my picture. All right, I have a rectangle. I know my area is 500 meters squared. Okay, now let's keep reading. The length is 4 meters longer than the width. All right, so if this is my width, okay, and this is my length, I'm told that my length is 4 plus my width. Okay, so I'm going to say let L represent length. We're going to let W represent width. Okay, and we want to figure out what these dimensions are. So I know what my area is. I know area of a rectangle is just length times width. So we got this. Yeah? Okay. Let's see. Area equals length times width. Instead of length, I'm going to write in 4 plus W. And because it's like that, I'm going to stick it in brackets. Times width. We know our area is 500, so I can put that there. Very nice. All right, so I have 500 equals, let's expand our brackets. So we're going to get W times 4 gives me 4W. Plus W times W gives me W squared. Good. Now in order to solve, because I have a W here and I have a W squared there, we're going to move everything to one side, set it all equal to 0, and solve. So move the 500 to the other side. It's minus 500 minus 500, and I'm just going to write it in my usual standard order. So we've got 0 equals W squared plus 4W minus 500. Well, that's definitely not going to factor because there's no way I've got two factors that multiply to 500 and that will add to 4. No way. Let's just jump right into quadratic formula and see what we get. Okay. Let's see. A will be equal to 1 because that's the coefficient of W squared. B will be equal to 4 because that's its coefficient. And C is my last number, which is negative 500. Quadratic formula, let's see, x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. Fill it in. Negative b is 4 plus or minus square root b is 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 500. All divided by 2 times a, which is 1. Okay. Let's keep it going. Simplify. Negative 4 plus or minus square root of 4 squared is 16. Negative times a negative gives me a positive. 4 times 5 is 20. A couple of extra zeros. All divided by 2. So that equals negative 4 plus or minus square root of 2016. All divided by 2. Okay, so I've got a root of a great big number. So just for fun, let's see if I can reduce that like I've been doing in all those wonderful radical questions. And by doing that, I can actually end up with a more exact answer. So let's just do a little aside here. Okay, and let's think about this. 2016. Well, I know all my different perfect squares. What's the biggest one, easiest one? 12 squared? Sure. Does that divided by, what's 12 squared? 144? It does! Who knew? 14. 14 times 144 gives me this. Okay. So 2016 equals, the whole root of that equals the root of 144 times 14. So the square root of 144 times the square root of 14, so that equals 12 root 14. Hey, that's pretty cool. So now I can get some exact answers up here. I love it. Math is awesome. Okay, so let's finish up. We're going to have two options here. We're going to have an option where my, what we're solving for, width is equal to negative 4 plus 12 root 14, all divided by 2. So let's simplify that. Let's break up my fraction here a little bit. Minus 4 over 2 plus 12 root 14 divided by 2. So we've got negative 2 plus 6 root 14. So there's one answer. And we're going to have when our width is negative 4 minus 12 root 14, all divided by 2. That gives me negative 4 over 2 minus 12 over 2 root 14. Simplify that out, and we get negative 2 minus 6 root 14. Well, that's going to give me a negative number, isn't it? So we don't want that one. Not an option since width can't be negative. So this one's not an option. So that's my final option for width. If you wanted to do it numerically, like if we calculated it, you'd end up with a decimal answer of 20.4. What was my original units? Did I have any? Meters. Oops. Meters. And that means my length, we said, was my width plus 4. So that'll give me 24.4 meters. And there's my dimensions. My length is 24.4 meters. And my width is 20.4 meters. Nice work.